This morning's reading is taken from Proverbs chapter 9, verses 1 to 12. Proverbs chapter 9, verses 1 to 12. Wisdom has built her house, and she has set up its 7 pillars. She has prepared her meat and mixed her wine. She's also set her table. She has sent out her servants, and she calls from the highest point of the city. Let all who are simple come to my house. To those who have no sense, she says, come eat my food and drink the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways, and you will live. Walk in the way of insight. Whoever corrects a mocker invites insults. Whoever rebukes the wicked incurs abuse. Do not rebuke mockers, or they will hate you. Rebuke the wise, and they will love you. Instruct the wise, and they will be wiser still. Teach the righteous, and they will add to their learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. For through wisdom your days will be many, and years will be added to your life. If you are wise, your wisdom will reward you. If you are a mocker, you alone will suffer.
As I thought about what I would do for a lesson on I guess you would call it the last Sunday of 2015, or as kind of an anticipation for the new year, I thought Proverbs would be a great place to go. One of the great books of the Bible. It's a book of wisdom. It's funny, when we talk about wisdom, psychologists talk about the fact that we have different intelligences. There are people who have, mechanical aptitudes, others have numerical aptitudes, and other things. But it's really rare to find somebody that we truly think of as wise. If you talk about somebody, who's wise, you get a mental image of a guy maybe an old guy with a long beard and pulling on the beard thoughtfully as they're, or the guy up, kind of the guru up on the mountaintop. It's not a commodity or an idea that we come across. We do have a sense where we talk about people who have, for example, street smarts, or people who have savvy, in certain areas. People who are shrewd with, economics, money, investments. But the wisdom for life is something that doesn't seem to be that valued. Yet, in the ancient world, wisdom was important. Consider that there's a section of the Bible that we refer to as wisdom literature. And the whole idea of it is that these are sections of the Bible, and there's talks about wisdom in the Old Testament and in the book of James, especially in the New Testament. But we come to the book of Proverbs. And the way most people see this book as a collection of wise sayings, and there's much of the book, it's just, like verse after verse, much not connected, although you see recurring ideas that keep popping back up. But we need to see a larger picture of Proverbs as a book about wisdom. I thought about just getting up here, starting my lesson, and looking at everybody and say, smarten up. And I think about, I hadn't thought about this when I was working on my lesson, but I was thinking about it this morning. One of the shows that I really enjoy watching is NCIS. And, a lot of you probably don't watch it, but it's Naval Criminal Investigation Service, I think it is. And the guy who heads this unit, Gibbs, has this thing that he does, especially with the 2 younger guys that are part of it. And when they do something that just isn't very smart or very wise, he slaps them in the back of the head. And, you can just see them when they say something and they know it's coming. They know that they deserve it. Hey, well, you think about it. learn a lot in life by making mistakes, don't we? By doing things that we afterward may think about and say, well, that was probably not a good idea. But, we've done it. And maybe somebody should smack us in the back of the head and say, okay, smarten up. And I think there's kind of an element of that in Proverbs, because wisdom leads to a way of living, a way of life. It leads to effective life, meaningful life, successful life. And so that's the concern of the writer of the book. Now, most of the book of Proverbs is attributed to Solomon. And in verses 1 to 7, there's a prologue, kind of an introduction to the idea of wisdom, just kind of setting the theme. But then, in verse 8, he starts, "Listen, my son, to your father's instruction." And we know that throughout much of the world and throughout much of history, the schooling in life has been within the family. And the father, especially, teaching the son. And so, how you may envision, as you read Proverbs, it's a little, probably not very accurate to think of Solomon sitting there with his son on his knee. Maybe more likely the son sitting on the floor and the father talking and instructing the son. Now, what's interesting is that as Proverbs is addressed to my son, the son that we know the most about from Solomon is Rehoboam. Now, we're not going to get into a study of Rehoboam, but Rehoboam was not a very wise king. In fact, his actions caused the kingdom to split because he did some very unwise things. So, one of the things that we kind of realize is that wisdom, unfortunately, sometimes may be learned by mistakes than by teaching. Solomon may have taught all these things, but Rehoboam, they don't seem to have taken with his son. But unfortunately, if we wait until we learn things the hard way, then that may be an unfortunate way to do that because it may be too late for some things. The book of Ecclesiastes, and I just only bring it up here because it's attributed to the preacher who refers to himself as, the wisest. Traditionally, many associate Ecclesiastes to Solomon as well. And what makes that important is because, again, there's a father-son thing in here, and the concern that Solomon expresses, or the writer of Ecclesiastes expresses, is that the one who follows him on the throne, the one who inherits everything he's done, may be a fool. It may be more self-fulfilling prophecy, and will blow everything and lose everything that the father has built. So I think it's kind of helpful to keep that in mind with when you're looking at. So Proverbs 9 probably is the most connected part, other than Proverbs 31, where you have the section on the worthy wife. But this section, and think about it being addressed to the son, but also to realize there's kind of a storyline within this. And in this, there are two women. And those two women are competing. You kind of get that flavor from the nature of the book. And that is that both are calling out to what's called the simple in the NIV. And the word simple is important in Proverbs. It's used about 15 times. And it refers to people who, verse 4, lack judgment and lack understanding. So in other words, the simple are just kind of plodding their way through life. One of the terms that's used in some of the other translations is to refer to the naive. You know, they're just not very aware of what's going on. And so the two women are identified as wisdom, down to verse 12 mainly, and then folly in what follows. Now, we didn't read the other 4 verses, and I want to read those now, okay? Because they give us a picture of this woman called Folly. The woman Folly is loud. She is undisciplined and without knowledge. She sits at the door of her house on a seat at the highest point of the city, calling out to those who pass by, who go straight on their way. Let all who are simple come in here, she says to those who lack judgment. Stolen water is sweet. Food eaten in secret is delicious. But little do they know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of the grave. Kind of nasty sounding, isn't it? Okay. So they're both calling out to the simple, the people who are easily persuaded and lack judgment is really the definition of the simple. So, Folly lives in a very prominent house. The highest. What's funny is they both are calling from on high. But Folly sits at the door. And what's interesting is some of the translations, as they look at this, refer to the idea that she's calling out to the simple, but they're people who are basically walking a straight path. So think of a loud, aggressive person who is trying to lure people into her house, to follow her way. And you can start getting that picture, that image of where that's going. See, the idea is that she preys on the gullible, the naive, the unassuming, those who don't have a clue. You know, it's interesting to think if that wording is right about she's calling out to the naive who are walking on the straight path. That means, think about it. Why are they walking on the straight path? Maybe it's because something they've been taught, but they're doing it without understanding or knowledge. There's no wisdom here. And so they're vulnerable because they don't understand. And so she's just beckoning them in to her house. There are two things that she says here in this chapter. You probably can think, as you read through the rest of Proverbs, you can see a lot of other things she says. But stolen water is sweet. I don't know if you've ever thought about, how do you steal water? Maybe we're more inclined to think of it today as you steal somebody else's water bottle. But is it likely that image is that they are too lazy to dig a well or to go to the well and haul their own water? Getting water back then, in those days, you didn't go to the kitchen and turn on the tap and you got water. You had to go to the well. Sometimes that might have been a great distance. So it's a lot easier if you see somebody coming back from the well with water and they set it down, then you go out and you just take it. It's kind of similar to the food eaten in secret is delicious. That's not talking about a person on a diet who sneaks to McDonald's. It's talking about food that has, like the water, been stolen. See, you take something that is not rightfully yours, then you tend to go off and kind of eat it in a private place where nobody can say, hey, that's mine. And so her way is a way of the lazy, of those who are not willing to work or put in the effort. They're just kind of coasting and say, oh, somebody did that. Okay, well, I'll just take it. And see, she's encouraging them to follow that way. I keep doing what they're doing. Solomon observes that the way offered, it's not really offered, is it? But the way encouraged by the woman folly is a way that's going to lead to death. It's not going to work out, not going to be helpful. Now, much of the chapter is about the other woman, wisdom. And it starts off by saying that she has built her house on 7 pillars. Now, we look at that and say, okay, well, is there a symbolism here? It's not identified. Or is it saying that she has a very solid, well-built house with a really good foundation? And that would make sense, wouldn't it? If we're talking about wisdom, you think about people foolishly go for, well, for example, think about people who want to get rich. They often go for the shaky, questionable, doubtful, fly-by-night schemes, is the expression we use. They try to come up with easy ways to make lots of money. I keep getting these things. I may go to a webpage like CNN, but often at the bottom there's these supposed links to other places, and one of them will say, learn how this woman in Winnipeg makes $7,000 a day. I think, I don't want to know. Because you know that something that is too easy is probably illegal, immoral, or both. So the idea of wisdom is that wisdom, her house is built well. There have been no shortcuts. It's a solid house. And so from her house, she has prepared her meat, her dinner, that she has worked. Did you see anything about working at Folly's house? No. She's just sitting at the door. But wisdom is, and you may be thinking about Psalm 30 or Proverbs 31 here, the worthy woman, the worthy wife, where she's industrious, hardworking, very disciplined. And so wisdom has prepared this meal and sent out her maids, some of the translations say servants, out. And as well, she calls out, inviting people. So you think about, okay, you want to go to Folly's house where she says, well, hey, go over to the neighbors and grab anything you can while they're not looking. Where wisdom says, hey, I've prepared this meal. And you can think about, the love and the planning and everything else that's gone into that. But she has a message where folly is saying, hey, just keep doing what you're doing. Steal the water, steal the food, whatever. Wisdom is saying, you need to leave the way that you've been following. She has a message. There's an interesting part of this in that then Proverbs here, the writer Solomon will warn about the idea, though, that if you try to correct somebody who is a fool, who's simple, they're not going to love you for it. They're going to bite your head off. Wisdom calls for people to walk in a way of understanding. To know what you're doing, how you're doing it, where you're going. I always get a kick out of I saw a situation comedy the other day where there's a conversation between a father and his daughter. He would ask her a question, and she'd say, I don't know. Why did you do this? I don't know. And, this went on for about 5 or 6 questions. And then she says, Dad, are you going to punish me? He says, I don't know. We're familiar with that expression that the unexamined life is not worth living. Walking without knowledge and without understanding, in other words, walking without wisdom, is a dead end. That's what Solomon says at the end of the chapter. Wisdom calls out to say, know where you're going and how. Because where folly's call is to death, wisdom's call is to a path of life. So, the foolish despise correction. That's just one of the things that kind of happen. They want to keep just going the way they're going. There's an expression that keeps going through my head, and whether you want to call it, that people have referred to it as the definition of insanity, the definition of folly. It's doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. People do the same thing. Why? Because it's easy to keep doing what we've been doing. I like the question sometimes that people ask in a situation like that and say, and how's that working for you? Because it's not. It's not getting anywhere. The wise, and I love the idea that Solomon puts in here. The wise want to improve. They love learning. They love those people who will try to help them to take a step in a better direction. But it is here in this context that Solomon says those verses that we're all, I think, pretty much all of us are familiar with, is that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That we have to get God into the right place in our lives. We've got to get His Word into the right place in our lives. And then to understand that wisdom will be shown by our actions. Wisdom is not just this esoteric thing that goes on in our heads. I always get a kick out of the scene in The Wizard of Oz when the wizard gives him his degree and he just suddenly starts spouting out all these ideas. Wisdom isn't about what we say, it's about how we live. James, in the New Testament, says, who's wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. See, wisdom helps direct our life. It helps us to understand our life. It helps us to see and know what's going on around us. Where do we get wisdom? James talks about praying for wisdom, but I don't think the image is that God just suddenly then opens up our head and dumps it in. I think a lot of our wisdom comes from our experience. It comes from what we learn from His Word. So, what I'd like to do is suggest that for 2016, this should be true of our lives all of the time, but I think for 2016, to make it our goal, to spend time with God and His Word, to build our knowledge of Him. If the fear of the Lord, that is our relationship with God, is the beginning of wisdom, then shouldn't we be spending a lot of time with Him so that we can use the expression, smarten up, so that we can have a great year. Let's stand as we sing.